In this movie, I added additional balls with different materials to the scene from the previous movie. I want to show you how I set up my AOVs so that I can easily select and edit the objects in programs like Photoshop. To be able to easily select the objects in another program, I create a CryptoMat AOV here. Therefore, I switch to Redshift. I open the AOV manager. I then navigate to my CryptoMat path. I switch to CryptoMat here. Still switching to bucket rendering. And we see that it works. With this, we can easily select objects. At the moment, this does not work with refractive materials. This means I can't create a mask for the middle sphere made of glass. Therefore, I switch back to the beauty path. Then I switch back to progressive rendering. Now I want to create a mask for the glass material, respectively for the sphere. I click with the right mouse button on this object. I select the Redshift render tags. Then I go to Redshift Object and navigate to Object ID. Here I assign the object ID number 1. In the glass material, we recognize a refraction. This is the red sphere in the background. In addition, there is a refraction from the large sphere. Therefore, I would like to create a mask for these as well. First, let's focus on the large sphere. I copy the tag we created earlier for this sphere. At the same time, I assign the object ID 2. Then I take the sphere that is behind the glass. I copy the tag for this sphere as well. Here I assign the object ID 3. We now create a puzzle mat. Going back to the AOV manager. In the left column, I select puzzle mat. I click on the AOV puzzle mat. At the top, I set the mode to object ID. There I enter the IDs 1, 2 and 3. After rendering, as expected, it looks exactly the same as before. We still need to activate this checkbox. With reflect and refract IDs, the glass material is included in the puzzle mat. I also activate this option. Now we can select the inner sphere as well as other objects, including the large and blue sphere in the refraction. By making a selection in the RGB channel, I can adjust the colors of the refractions. Now I can make a selection and change the colors in the refraction. Now we will switch back to the beauty path. I disable region rendering and go back to the progressive rendering. We now also want to select the small sphere inside the glass material. For this, I navigate to this sphere. I take the object tag and copy it for the small sphere. Then I assign the object ID number 4. Now we need an additional puzzle mat. I create another puzzle mat. Here I select object ID again. For the red channel, I assign the number 4. I render and switch to the puzzle mat. If I select this area, probably nothing will be displayed. I forgot to check the appropriate box for the puzzle mat. This should take the refractions into account. Now the sphere should be visible in the center. We can now close the window, switching back. In order not to bore you, I have already prepared some things. In the AOV manager, I added additional passes. Once shadows, global illumination, reflections, as well as specular and diffuse lighting. I start a rendering with diffuse lighting. In this pass, no light is coming from the small sphere in the glass object. Therefore, we need to adjust the secondary ray visibility in the diffuse lighting setting. We set this from disable to refraction and transparency. Then we find that the light affects refractions. So when we work with glass materials, we have to be careful to adjust this accordingly. The same is true for specular lighting. At the moment, it looks like this. The light hits the glass material directly. A specular spot is created. However, we see nothing of the inner sphere. It is not illuminated in this pass. Therefore, I changed the secondary ray visibility to refraction and transparency. This makes the specular point visible in the refraction as well on the sphere. The same is true for the reflections. Switching to the reflections, there are currently no reflections in the sphere, also not in the smaller sphere. I set the refraction and transparency again. This makes the reflections clearer. You can also see a slight reflections on the smaller sphere. It is similar with the global illumination. The inner sphere should get global illumination. I also changed the secondary ray visibility here. Now the global illumination is visible in the sphere and its refraction. I now return to the beauty path. Next, let's look at some more AOVs. The two passes are still missing to get our overall picture. We still have additional materials. The glass material, the subsurface scattering material. So we need one pass for the refraction and one for the subsurface scattering. In subsurface scattering, we can also set the secondary ray visibility to refraction and transparency. I assume that we cannot see the sphere in the refraction of the glass material. Therefore, it is okay to leave this option disabled. Let's briefly consider these two passes. Here we see the subsurface scattering. This is the material used. Now let's switch to the refraction. Here we recognize our glass material and this path. Let's go back to the beauty view. Now we want to render the whole thing. I will open the render settings. After that I go to save. I select multipath image and click on save. Then I enter the desired path. For the format I choose Open EXR with 32-bit. Attention, even if we would select 16-bit, we will get a 32-bit EXR file. I will make sure that the alpha channel is enabled. Then I start the rendering. After the rendering is finished, we find two files on the disk, the CryptoMat file and the actual rendered image. For the plugin, I make sure that split alpha is enabled. Let's still organize our layers. I will hide everything for now. Then I select the Diffuse Lighting path. I move this path down and activate it. Above that, we place the Specular Lighting. Then comes the subsurface scattering. Then the refraction and reflections of the glass. And finally, the global illumination. Let's activate all these layers. The exact order above the diffuse lighting is not important. I click on all layers above diffuse lighting, navigate up to the blending modes and set it to linear dodge. Next I select all the objects or layers in this group. With Ctrl G I group them. Now we want to apply a mask to it. I will briefly demonstrate two methods. First, a method that does not provide the best quality. For this I navigate to the alpha level. By pressing Ctrl and left mouse button, I select everything. With Ctrl C, I copy it to the clipboard and then hide it. Afterwards, I go to my group, create a mask and hold down the Alt key. And click into the mask, paste the copied content and deactivate it. With the Alt key and left mouse button, everything appears correct at first sight. Now I add the background image. Position it. Now move it all the way down. The other layers are above it. An unsightly transition is visible. A distinct edge is visible. This results from the uncleanly applied mask because I used this layer. I would like to present a method that provides a clean result. I create a copy of the whole. To do this, I hold down the Alt key, I position the copy directly below for comparison. I hide the upper layer. I remove the mask, pulling it into the trash and confirm with delete. Now I apply the approved method. I click on the alpha channel or layer. At the bottom, fade everything out, switching to the color channels. Here I see red, green and blue. It is irrelevant which channel one selects. I click on green, hold down the Control key. This is how I load the green channel into the selection. Below I create an alpha channel from this channel. Now it is visible. I click on the alpha channel. For this I hold down Control key. Now we have selected the alpha channel. At the top I activate RGB again. I switch back to the layers. I fade in the upper layer again. Now I navigate to the copy. I click on the group and create a new mask. Will the mask be transferred directly to this group? I will blend the background image down here. We can see that the alpha mask is pretty perfect compared to what we first created. Let me demonstrate with the old method. We recognize a pronounced hem at the edge. Now I will delete this entire group. Now our objects are cleared. So we can easily access and select the individual objects. We would like to create some more alpha channels, for example to select the glass sphere. Or maybe to recolor. As needed, we could recolor the inner sphere or the individual objects, or the colors in the refraction. If we would recolor the big sphere blue, would also change the color of the refraction. For this purpose, we have created a puzzle mat. We navigate to the puzzle mat, going to the associated channels. Here we have the red channel, the green channel and the blue channel. From these channels we now create an alpha channel. We click on the red channel, load this into memory or selection with the Control key, and create an alpha channel from it. Then we do the same with the next one. We click on the green channel and use the Control key again and create another alpha channel. We click on the blue channel, press the Control key, create a blue channel based on the blue color. Then we navigate back to RGB. At the bottom we now have various alpha channels at our disposal. We now hide these. We then return to the layers. Now we also want to create an alpha channel for the central sphere. This refers to this puzzle mat, so we are activating it. Then we switch to the channels. We had assigned this sphere to the red channel. So I select the red channel by means of the Control key. There we also create an alpha channel. We go back to RGB and switch again. So we have created some useful masks. With these we can easily color the objects. Next we deal with the CryptoMattes. We have a separate layer for this. However, this is not necessary in this example. We have a separate file. More precisely about this CryptoMatte file, I drag the file next to it and make sure I have the CryptoMatte mask option enabled. After that I confirm with OK. If I do it this way, I get the already known result. The disadvantage is that I have to create an alpha channel for each plane. Alternatively, I could use the selection seen earlier and set it as a mask. However, we have found that this does not always produce optimal results, but there is a way to improve it. I close the current window and go back to the options. Then I import the file into Photoshop again. This time I select the option Transparent under CryptoMatte Masks. This directly masks individual passes for me. I no longer have to create each mask individually, they are perfect immediately. Now we see several white layers. Each object is masked with a white color. The special thing is that I only have to hold the Control key, so I can select any layer. This gives me a precise selection of that plane. I group all the renderings. For this I press Ctrl G. I name this group Crypto. Then I copy the entire layer, or rather the entire folder. This I paste into my rendering. I center it with the Shift key. I hide the group. Nevertheless, I can hold down the Control key and select every single object. This is very efficient and fast. The best is coming right now. I want to select the front sphere, which has a depth of field. I will look for the matching layer for a moment. I'm going to show this layer briefly so that I can select it directly. At the top, I will select Auto Select and click on it. This is the layer I'm looking for. I fade out everything for a moment. I activate this by pressing the Control key. Thus I have made the selection. I fade out everything again. Now I add another adjustment layer. I select the saturation. I take this layer and move it down. Change the color. Then I adjust the saturation a little bit. Maybe I should remove it from the group, then it works better. You can see that the color change is perfect. Although you can see a visible blur in the rendering. Now we have many layers and masks for our objects. I'd suggest to select the layers we don't need. For example, Alpha, CryptoMattes. I group the two puzzle mats with Ctrl and G. Afterwards I hide them. There's also our shadow path. I would like to use that one as well. With this we adjust the shadows in the tonal values. We have already done that. I'm not going to go through this again now. This selection would result in lower quality. I will load this selection into an adjustment layer. I will now access the channels again. For this I hold down the Control key. I click on RGB at the top. Then I go down and create an alpha channel from the selection. After that I switch back to my layers. Here I create a new adjustment layer. To edit the shadow I choose levels. With this I can adjust the tonal values. I move the layer directly under shadows. I click on the shadows layer, add it to the group. Likewise the RGB color layer. I add these directly to the group. Here we also have a few layers that we don't need right now. I move this one all the way to the bottom. At the top I now have the levels layer directly. Here I can adjust the tonal values of the shadow. What else can we find in our file? At the top is the layer or group CryptoMattes. Opening the group. Now I can select any object with the Control key. Under Channels I can access individual objects. Here I can control the color of the refractions. When I change the color of the sphere, the color in the refraction also changes. Let's test this once. I choose the big ball and switch to the layers. With Ctrl and left click I selected this channel. Then I go to the adjustment layer. We go to hue and saturation. Here I can change the color of the sphere, for example. Let's choose a red tone. We should increase the saturation. You can see that the color changes in the refraction at the same time. I move this adjustment layer further down. This is for a better clarity. If you don't want to lose the setting levels, I would recommend you to save the file in PSD format. Let me demonstrate. I select File, then Save As, and save it as a Photoshop file. We will see that the Photoshop file is 120 MB. The EXR file is much smaller at 49.4 MB. The CryptoMat file has a size of 4 MB, 41 MB. A disadvantage of working with Photoshop files in the 32-bit mode is that these files are generally much larger than EXR files. When I save the file as EXR, I select EXR and name it Render EXR. This helps us to distinguish the files. Then I click on Save. In a moment, a dialog of a plugin appears. We can confirm everything like this. Let's click on Write. We will notice that the save process takes longer than saving with Photoshop. I'm going to close the file now. I'm going to switch over here. We can see that the file is smaller than the Photoshop file. Here we have 72 MB compared to the previous 120 MB. If I want to open the file, I drag it in directly without activating anything. Let's click on Open. Let's notice that all the setting layers have disappeared. Likewise, the folder structure. All layers are stacked on top of each other. I will close this again and open it again, pulling the file back in. At the bottom, I activate Create Layer Groups. The layers are all arranged differently. The CryptoMattes are grouped according to a certain pattern. Here you can see some groupings. The adjustment layers are not present. The masks are down here. This is the reason why I would recommend you to save the file as a Photoshop file. This way we can continue to work on the file at any time. I will open the Photoshop file again. Now we have everything as we saved it. Now you can continue working on the image. Some tools that are available in 16 or 32-bit are not accessible. There are also some adjustment layers that do not work. Some tools, such as Magic Wand tool, are not available. To access this tool, you need to switch to 16-bit. Before converting, I would make a copy of the original. You go to Image in the menu, then to Mode, switches to 16-bit. We decide whether to keep the layers or not. When I select Don't Merge, the colors are no longer displayed correctly. With Ctrl+C, I undo the change, repeat the process, go to Image, select Mode and then 16-bit. Now I click on Merge. All layers are then merged. We can now see a color change. We can also enable or disable preview. It shows that everything is compressed and put on one layer. The colors change, which is to be expected, of course. Now I want it to look like it did before. So we'll change the method here to exposure and gamma. This leads to the desired result. If I now click on OK, the final result is displayed on the plane. The special thing is, I have all the tools of Photoshop available in 16-bit and have all alpha channels available for selection under Channels. Perhaps I shouldn't have taken that action. I will undo the whole thing with Ctrl+Z. I wouldn't necessarily use adjustment layers here to make adjustments unless it is desired, because I would make such adjustments in the final version. This is just to mask out individual render elements. So let's repeat the process. I select Image, then navigate to Mode, select 16-bit, then Merge. Above I change the method to exposure and gamma, confirm with OK, and with that we are done. Now we can work with the alpha channels without any problems. That's it so far for this topic. Next, let's look at some more AOVs. and how to use them efficiently.